always reminded, when I start thinking about these things in church, I'm always reminded what to me is the most beautiful story in my Bible, Old Testament or New, the story of Job from the Hebrew Bible. First modern story in a way, because the answer is a little elusive and it's not sort of black and white. And it's the story, as you know, of a virtuous man who finds himself cursed by God, and he ends up living on a dung heap at the edge of town, and all his flocks die, and he's covered with oozing sores, and it's not so good. And Job is unhappy with this, and demands that God appear and give him, and for 38 long chapters, he demands that God appear and give him some answer as to why this has happened. And this is a kind of case of be careful what you wish for, because God eventually does appear, speaking out of a tornado. And there are better theologians than I in this room, but I think the speech that God then gives is the longest soliloquy in the Bible, Old Testament or New. It's the first piece of great nature writing in the Western tradition. Biologically accurate, sexy, crunchy, incredibly beautiful. It's a kind of tour of the physical universe. And there's one thing that's very odd about it. It's unbelievably sarcastic. God's just taunting Job the whole time. If you're so smart, well, do you know where I keep the storehouse of the hail and the snow? Can you tell the proud waves, here you shall break and no further? On and on. And eventually, after a long stretch of all of this taunting and all this beautiful description, eventually Job basically just says, sorry I asked, and sits down. That's always been the human position vis-a-vis the natural world. Small against the backdrop of something big. Clearly the message from God is something about that it's enough to be a small part of a big and orderly and mysterious and buzzing and cruel and beautiful planet. It's only in our time that we somehow quickly grew big enough, the last 20 or 30 years, to be able to answer God back. Do you know where I keep the snow and the rain? Increasingly we do. We've added 5% moisture to the atmosphere. When it rains now, like those horrible downpours, it's not an act of God. It's nothing natural anymore about it. We have our thumb on the scale. Do you tell the proud waves, here you shall break and no further? Yeah. We're going to raise the level of the ocean if we're not careful. 6, 7, 8 feet. In the course of this century, we're going to drive hundreds of millions of people from where they live. And so the very interesting task that we have as organizers, as activists, as people who care, as people of faith, is somehow, in a sense, to persuade our species to make itself a little smaller in the course of this century, to take up a little space, less space, to back off a little bit, to leave some margin for creation. That's different from the other social movements that we've had, which usually have been about assertion, rightful assertion, demanding correctly a place in the center of things. Now we have to figure out how to make ourselves a little smaller. And that is a task, I think, uniquely suited for faith communities. One of the tasks that really only faith communities in our culture can effectively perform, because mosques and temples and churches and synagogues are about the last places left in our culture that can even begin to posit some reason other than accumulation for human existence, who understand at some level that it's not the economy, stupid, that is the measure of all things, that there are other ways that we measure. And so that seems to me the job. I don't know whether we're going to win. There are scientists who say we have waited too long to get started. The forces of this heating are very large and powerful and swiftly moving. There are political scientists who say that the obstacles are simply too big to be overcome. ExxonMobil made more money last year than any company in the history of money. Okay? In our political system, that buys plenty of power. We're seeing some of that kind of money spent in this state by Valero and Tesoro and the others who are trying to take down California's landmark laws. So between the scientists and the political scientists, you can't offer any guarantee of victory. In fact, I suppose that if you were a betting person, you might be inclined to bet that we wouldn't. Methodists aren't allowed to bet, but in any event, that strikes me as a bet that none of us are allowed to make. That we have no moral choice faced with the biggest problem that human beings have ever faced, a problem that just happens to be bearing down when we are alive and in a place to do something about it. We have no choice but to do all that we can to try and change those odds in some significant way. So, I'll just end by saying what a great honor it is for me to be in a room full of people who have taken up this fight, to be in a room full of colleagues and comrades and brothers and sisters, and we will fight as hard as we can and have great faith in the outcome after that. Thank you all enormously.